Welcome to this, our 6th Sunday in the season of Lent. And while I can't actually see you, and you can see me, I'm in our space, imagining where each of you often sits, and thinking about where you are, and holding you in prayer and sacredness as we begin this time. And so as we begin on this last Sunday of the season of Lent, we acknowledge that we're on the lands of the Coast Salish people, particularly the Lekwungen, and we give thanks for their stewardship of this land. And so as we begin together, as Margaret has invited you to do in the past, we hope that you have a candle with you and that you're ready to light it as Margaret comes on screen now to light our Christ candle.
Normally we would have one of the children light the candle, and we just want to say we're certainly missing your energy, your parents, and the whole congregation. It has been said that it is better to light one candle than to curse the darkness. And so as we light our Christ candle in the presence of this Holy Week in which we are entering, we give thanks for Jesus, his purpose, his passion, his love, and we give thanks for the light that is in all of us. Thanks be to God. Amen. This morning's scripture lesson is taken from the book of Luke, chapter 22, verses 47 to 62 and 66 to 71. Jesus was still speaking when a crowd arrived led by Judas, one of the 12 disciples. He came up to Jesus to kiss him. But Jesus said, "Judas, is it with a kiss that you betray the Son of Man?" When the disciples who were with Jesus saw what was going to happen, they asked him, "Shall we use our swords, Lord?" And one of them struck the high priest's slave and cut off his right ear. But Jesus said, "Enough of this." He touched the man's ear and healed him. Then Jesus said to the chief priests and the officers of the temple guard and the elders who had come there to get him, "Did you have to come with swords and clubs, as if I were an outlaw? I was with you in the temple every day, and you did not try to arrest me. But this is your hour to act, when the power of darkness rules." They arrested Jesus and took him away into the house of the high priest, and Peter followed at a distance. A fire had been lit in the center of the courtyard, and Peter joined those who were sitting around it. When one of the servant women saw him sitting there at the fire, she looked straight at him and said, "This man too was with Jesus." But Peter denied it. "Woman, I don't even know him." After a little while, a man noticed Peter and said, "You are one of them too." But Peter answered, "No, I'm not." And about an hour later, another man insisted strongly, "There isn't any doubt that this man was with Jesus because he is also a Galilean." But Peter answered, "I do not know what you are talking about." At once, while he was still speaking, a rooster crowed. The Lord turned around and looked straight at Peter, and Peter remembered that the Lord had said to him, "Before the rooster crows tonight, you will say 3 times that you do not know me." Peter went out and wept bitterly. When day came, the elders, the chief priests, and the teachers of the law met together, and Jesus was brought before the council. "Tell us," they said, "are you the Messiah?" He answered, "If I tell you, you will not believe me, and if I ask you a question, you will not answer. But from now on, the Son of Man will be seated at the right side of Almighty God." They all said, "Are you then the Son of God?" He answered them, "You say that I am." And they said, "We don't need any witnesses. We ourselves have heard what he said."
It's a challenging time to be in the midst of the season of Lent and the COVID pandemic. We kind of feel like perhaps it's coming at us on all sides. Couldn't they choose a more uplifting kind of scripture? Why are we doing this at this time? All of us kind of want to bypass this pandemic and get to the end of it. When will it be over? And we just skip over the impending deaths that we know are coming. The disciples, Jesus, they all had similar feelings and experiences. And often we want to skip over the Good Friday moments, the trials, the tribulation, and the death. And yet we find ourselves in the midst of it. And we must make the journey in the same way that Jesus and the disciples also had to make this journey. And so we don't get to move simply from Palm Sunday to Easter Sunday. We must make the journey through the valley of the shadow of death, through the unknowing of when Easter, if it will come at all, and all that goes into that. There are lots of elements to this story. So let's walk through it a little bit. Luke, whose story we read, is based on Mark's gospel. And Luke and Matthew each take Mark's gospel and they rework it in a different way. Each has a particular theological perspective that they are wanting us to be aware of. And in the midst of this story, we're aware too that there are mythological elements of it. There's no way for us to know if the dialogue with Peter sounded that way. Did Peter tell the story later? Would he have felt embarrassed about his betrayal? Or is the story constructed in that way to invite us in the ways in which we too find ourselves in conundrums? The story begins with Jesus' arrest in the garden. And here Jesus identifies Judas as the one who betrays him with a kiss. The kiss of friendship, the kiss of familiarity is turned into a betrayal. The disciples rise up, swords in hand, ready to protect Jesus. And Jesus both looks at Judas with sorrow, but also at the disciples, and says to those who've come to arrest him, "You've come with clubs and with swords. And yet each day I was in the synagogue with you teaching, and I wasn't a threat in this way. When have I ever resorted to violence?" And so even as the disciples move to that kind of instinctive place, Jesus responds with compassion and healing, preparing the ear of the one who is wounded, and looking deeply into the souls of those who are there, admonishing them and also challenging them to do and be something more in the midst of that darkness. Jesus is carted off, says the story, to the high priest's house. And there he's questioned, interrogated. In the midst of all of that, night falls. And Peter, wanting somehow to support Jesus, wanting somehow to be on hand in case there's a way to rescue him, to remove him from the clutches of the establishment, waits on the fringes. But it's a dangerous time for Peter and the disciples and everyone. As we talked in the beginning of the season of Lent and the way in which Passover and the temple are constructed, and all those tensions. It's a dangerous time. Peter's confronted by others around that fire. "Are you not one of them?" he's asked. And each time he's asked, he says, no, not me. Is Peter denying because he's not proud of his association with Jesus? Or is he simply being wise enough to know that by being arrested with Jesus, that will be of no help to Jesus or his community? What's going through his head as he tries to weigh what loyalty looks like? How can he best support others in the midst of this? All of us have to make decisions about what loyalty and support means in the midst of this pandemic. And we want to be there to support. And the agony of doctors and nurses and family members who have loved ones who are dying alone. Wonder if they have been loyal enough. Wonder if they have been able to support their loved ones in the best ways. And have anguish and grief over the choices that are before them. They have to choose between supporting or putting themselves and others at risk. And so the story echoes for us in that same way. The story unfolds and has Jesus being questioned by the religious authorities, who are very attached to a certain idea of what is acceptable within the religious rules and practices. I have to say, I've been dismayed by some of the actions and activities of others along the more conservative or fundamentalist spectrum of the Christian church, who've continued to have large gatherings and to have church under the false impression that somehow they are exempt from the hopes and the pushing of health officials to slow the pandemic by folks not gathering, who cry out in a belief that somehow God will rescue them where God has not rescued others. I felt even more dismayed this week as I watched tents go up in Central Park in New York, in which Franklin Graham's community and the Good Samaritan Purse put tents up meant to serve and try to alleviate the suffering, but then demanding that those who worked in those tents would sign a covenant that they would not acknowledge the gays and lesbians and those who were transgendered are acceptable in the sight of God. A stuckness of religious authorities to an outdated, outmoded, and frankly evil perspective that alienates them from the grace, compassion that we see of Jesus in this story. And so I hear those words of Jesus echoed when indicted with those theological perspectives. Jesus simply chooses not to argue, but lets their words and actions condemn themselves. So you say, he says. And so as deaths rise in different parts of the world, and people find themselves becoming weary of the darkness, the Italian community, which 3 weeks ago had folks singing on their balconies, encouraging each other, has found the energy for that to be harder to find. It's hard to sustain that kind of hope in the midst of the darkness. Words found scratched on the walls of Auschwitz by one of the incarcerated during the Nazi era have these familiar words. I believe in the sun even when it is not shining. I believe in love even when I feel alone. I believe in God even when God is silent. We don't know who the writer of that was, or whether he survived the Holocaust. but those writing those words and similar words through other tragic and dark times did so in the belief and faith that if it was not they who would survive, that it would be others who would carry that light into the darkness. The candle that we lit at the beginning of the service is a fragile light. Candlelight can be a fragile thing. And perhaps that's why it is the symbol of hope, because it reminds us that hope sometimes feels like it's been snuffed out, but that it can be lit again. And that cycle can repeat itself over and over. And yet, as fragile as that light is, it can be lit again, if not by ourselves, by others around us. And so as we make this journey into the darkness, as we anticipate the height of the curve still to come, as we start to encounter death on our doorstep, may we do so in the context of this story, where we hold on to what's core about our way of being, our central values, and how we want to be remembered in the midst of this crisis as loving, gracious, forgiving, and embodying the possibility that new life can emerge without knowing for sure what that promise will look like. May we go gently into this dark night, reminding ourselves that we do not do so alone. As the disciples went into this dark night, they didn't do it alone. They did it in the company of each other. May we too know that we aren't alone. Thanks be to God. Amen. And so with that, let us prepare ourselves to hear a piece of music we've heard a number of times before. It comes as part of the soundtrack from the movie The Mission. And it's both melancholy and hopeful. It has the tones of grief as well as the tones of an invitation that this isn't all that there is. And so as Louise and Jeff play, let us sink into all the feelings that come with this piece of music.
heartened by all your prayers. They really make a difference and help us to feel connected to you. And so let us once again join in that timeless ritual of prayer. Please pray with me. O loving God, holy mystery, you love with a heart that beats throughout the cosmos, even as you understand the pain and the complexities of the strange times in which we now find ourselves. As we stand on the cusp of Holy Week, preparing to enter anew the timeless story of Jesus' pain and passion, may we see with new eyes and experience afresh the call to live fully and love deeply and to not turn away from the pain of this world. We remember the thousands around our world who have died from COVID-19, people of every walk of life, people from every demographic. We remember families who have been separated from their loved ones in their time of greatest need, and the agony of feeling helpless and not being able to voice their love and their goodbyes in person. We also remember people who are in quarantine with the virus and all those who had to have surgeries canceled and treatments postponed due to freeing up space in our hospitals. Perhaps, O God, we are feeling anew the loneliness and the isolation that may have accompanied the disciples as they walked that last week with Jesus, feeling helpless, wanting to reach out, but being kept at a distance, feeling uncertain and left with questions and emotions that were so unsettling. And so it is, we pause now as we allow ourselves to touch upon the depth of our own feelings in this time. Uncertainty, fear, wonder at how long this will be our reality, deep loneliness, and worry for those we love and for the thousands who have lost their jobs or been laid off, or simply who do not know if they will have work to return to, and a sense of despair of how we will find our way back. Loving God, you know our hearts and you understand that which is beyond our own understanding. You comfort with the strength of a mother and the tenderness of a father. In these times when we are overcome by emotions which are so big, may we find our quiet center in you. We are so heartened by the compassion, the dedication, and the perseverance of those courageous frontline workers, not only in our healthcare systems, but in so many sectors. May they indeed feel our profound gratitude for the magnitude of what they are offering in this time. And so it is as we journey through this strange week, this holy week, this week of uncertainty and chaos, this week where the veil between life and death is thin indeed. May we be gifted with a sense of the compassion of Jesus, who even in his own isolation and sadness and questions and doubt, allowed the magnitude of the bigger picture to be his steadying rock. May we share this same passion and purpose, all the while being held and supported by your love, O God, the love that will not let us go, ever. Amen and amen.
So as we conclude our time together, let us look again at the fragility of that flame and remind ourselves of the words that Margaret opened with, that it's better to light one candle in hope than to curse the darkness. So go from wherever it is that you are now and remind yourselves that this light, however fragile it is, and whether it is extinguished or not, can be lit again and again as we make this journey together through